Welcome everybody back with another great guest, Ron Monteiro. I had the good fortune of meeting Ron and a few other folks at a dinner after some sessions at the last AFP conference. For those of you that are not familiar with that, it's the Association for Financial Professionals. They every year do a big conference. This one was in San Diego, one of my favorite cities. And I got to meet Ron and Christian Wadig, who actually co-presented a session with me, Andrew Childress, we just had on the show recently, and some other folks as well. But Ron is a former finance professional. I would argue still a finance professional. You just shifted the focus of what you do within finance, who now runs his own training and speaking business and also hosts his own podcast, the Love Mondays podcast. Want to definitely talk to you about that. His experience includes senior finance roles at Kraft, Campbell's, and Kruger Products. He now trains companies around the world on soft skills and leadership skills, near and dear to my heart. And he also partners with Paul Barnhurst, the FP&A guy, on many other finance training courses. And with that, Ron, if you could, however you feel appropriate, fill in the blanks on the stuff that you're working on now that is most interesting to you.
Yeah, thank you, John. I really appreciate being on your podcast and wonderful to have these type of conversations. So I think you captured it really well. And I like how you said, I'm still a finance professional, so I'm just on a different side. And I'm all about how do we make finance and accounting, how do we get them to the table? How do we upskill people? How do we build confidence? How do we have really practical sessions to help finance get to the next level? Because one of my observations, and frankly, I was very shy when I was junior in my career, and I had phenomenal mentors, coaches, managers, as well as training sessions, which helped me get out of my comfort zone. And in particular, where I spent 15 years, I went from a very shy accountant to a business leader. So I actually did a few roles in supply chain finance and sales finance and traveled the country and worked with cross-functional partners. And it was just a wonderful environment to really take my game to the next level. And that's where I figured out how valuable finance and FP&A can be to a business. And that's what I want to spread. And I truly love those, pictures behind you. It's a good day to have a good day for finance. Everything is figure outable. Beautiful quotes there to say, how can I help finance people way earlier in their career than I got helped, right? That's what I'm all about.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like you and I have a very similar mission. I had a slightly different experience in that I had one or two phenomenal mentors and a lot of experiences with being thrown into the deep end of the pool and people saying, I just need this by Friday, just get it done kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which was stressful, but also extremely helpful. Being forced to have to figure things out and learn how to learn quickly, in hindsight, are great skills to have, but there's a lot of different ways we can get there. And I feel like it doesn't have to be painful. And I think, like yourself, I'm trying to do what I can in my business to help people get where I got to much faster and without a lot of the pain.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think changing is hard, right? It's hard work. So getting to another place, it does involve getting out of your comfort zone and jumping into the deep end of the pool and being uncomfortable. And those are all skills that I try to encourage people. That's what's going to help you get there, right?
Yeah.
Being uncomfortable.
So you mentioned being shy early in your career and you touched on confidence. I'm curious, when you were a kid, let's say your teenage years, like in high school, who were you in the scheme of things? Like when I think about myself, I was shy, very introverted. My thing was all the non-cool sports, right? I ran cross country, I swam, I played water polo, none of the big sports, but they did enable me to be a part of something, but I was never part of the cool stuff. When you were in high school, how would you describe yourself?
Yeah, so my experience is really interesting that I moved from Kenya to Canada right when I started high school. So think about very different environments where soft skills and social skills are not really front and center to a country in like Canada, where frankly, my teenagers now are better presenters than I was in my 20s, right? So I was a fish out of water, really uncomfortable. And it was a life-changing experience. I like how you brought sports into it. I've always been a massive soccer fan. I still play a lot of soccer. I coach soccer. And I was part of the soccer team right from grade 9, right? I tried out. And that was one of my paths into learning how to become more of a social person. But having said that, I did struggle through most of high school in terms of how do I fit in? How do I have a voice and I was always very quiet. And that extended to university. And frankly, my first couple of jobs, I was quiet. I wouldn't say what was on my mind. That's why I have so much passion for what I do now.
Yeah, interesting. So I don't know much about Kenya in terms of culture, but I'm curious. You mentioned an immediate cultural difference in like how people present themselves, social skills, and things like that. So I'm curious also when the connection between what you were thinking about as a kid in terms of what do I want to be when I grow up and what you're doing now. Is there any through line that seems obvious to you looking back, where when you think back to something you wanted to be as a kid, there's still a piece of that in what you do now?
Yeah. So I did want to be a soccer player. So unfortunately, I'm not playing for Barcelona or any old team. But where I pull it back is one of the things I've always had a passion for is teaching, coaching, or helping. Right.
Okay.
And it's an interesting through line that I see very clearly now that anytime there was a training opportunity in a business environment, anytime there's a coaching opportunity, so on the sports field or in business, I'm one of the first people to put my hand up. So the big through line
Yeah.
is I get a lot of joy in terms of helping people. And I get a lot of joy out of being in a team environment. So absolutely love both those elements to it. And I love your question to say, what's that through line that connects from, you call it those childhood dreams to what I'm doing now? And I feel like I've found that sweet spot. I'm still finding it, I'm refining it, but it really is in that helping others build confidence, right? Because I had lots of other people do that for me.
I love the transparency in what you said about you're still finding it, because I feel like in today's world of social media, there's so many people that put out there like, I found my passion. Like they're on the path and they're checking all the boxes on doing the things we're supposed to do. And I still feel like I've for sure found what I want to do professionally, but I feel every day I'm going, oh, maybe I should pull some of that in. Maybe I should stop focusing on that. And it still feels like it's a work in progress, even today. Um,
Yeah, yeah, no, it's a mindset, and I think it's a beautiful mindset to have because it really is about, I know it's cliche, but enjoying the journey and just being open to possibilities. And
yeah.
when I resigned from my last job about 3 years ago, I thought I was going to be a personal coach. I really had no idea where this would evolve into, and now it's evolving to so many beautiful places. And at the same time, I'm also like pretty open to, hey, some things are not going to work, and that's okay. And so
Yeah.
just having that kind of mindset to say, yeah, I'm going to put myself out there. I'm going to go all in and then I'm going to figure out what sticks. Like it's a really cool place to be where you're okay if something doesn't work, right? You really are.
So when you made the transition, it sounds to me like you had a business plan, whether it was on paper or not, you had a plan in mind of how you were going to do your own thing, right?
Yeah. So interesting. Here's how it worked. So I was working for Campbell Soup at the time. I did this phenomenal training program where the three coaches, who actually one of them is now my personal coach, helped us figure out, peel back to what is our true purpose? Like it was one of the ones where they had, similar to your question earlier, where do you get the most joy personally and professionally was the big question they asked me. And I came to that conclusion. I'm a teacher in finance clothing, right? It was just one of those light bulb moments that happens.
Yeah.
And from that moment, I actually hired that gentleman to be my coach. He's an amazing person. And he helped me start formulating a path to say, how do I build my own business? And I had zero confidence when I started. And that's where somebody like my coach Wayne, he had walked my path. Right? So I always tell people, find people who have walked your path or similar.
Yeah.
And he helped coach me through it. So it was a nice transition where he slowed me down when I needed to. He sped me up. And he was just one of those gentlemen we could talk through it and think, what do I need to do in order to build confidence that I can just, at some point say, look, I'm going out on, right.
Yeah.
And as you said, when we talked about being uncomfortable, hard work, maybe taking a chance, I did all those things. And I love how you said, look, social media sometimes portrays a very clean image. Starting a business is messy, right? Like my first 6 months, I was making like almost nothing. Like I was just like bills are rolling in and I was like, what am I going to do? So that's where it's important to talk about, hey, the pitfalls and be transparent. And that's what I'm all about.
You said something that hits on something that in the last few years, I've started to have these little aha moments where I realize that I market myself as a communication skills trainer for FP&A folks, FP&A and finance people, right? That's my background. That's where I come from. And in the last couple of years, I think I've started to realize more and more communication skills. It's like the gateway drug to mindset and psychology and awareness of how to use all that. And I focus on communication skills because I just feel like the further up you go in your career, the balance starts to shift towards the importance of communication and soft skills versus technical skills, right? We all need a base sort of core level of tech skills to just do the job. But once you're in the job, when I looked around in my career and I saw people getting the cool projects, the raises, the promotions, the better jobs somewhere else, it was always those people that had that, like the French say, that je ne sais quoi, that thing, you can't quite put your finger on it. Like, why did that person head quicker than me? And almost every time, if I look back in hindsight, it's something to do with the more intangible, most people consider intangible, the softer skills like what you and I tend to focus on more. But I feel like it really all starts out with the mindset, and then all the other stuff, the implementation of those things, that's the technical stuff that becomes stuff that you and I would teach. Like, hey, here's the mindset. Now we have a certain behavior that we want to train. So the outside world now has this particular perception that, hey, Ron's a great presenter. He's a great trainer. Those are behaviors other people observe, but they all start up here in our psychology.
Yeah, no, I love that. And one of the books on your bookshelf there, Light Force by Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins always talks about, look, you live to where you see yourself. So it's all about cultivating that mindset where you see yourself as a powerful force or as whatever your ideal version of yourself is. But again, that takes work. It takes daily habits, daily work. I was reading a Robin Sharma book, one of my favorite authors, and it talks about that hour of power before your day starts, which is easier said than done.
Yeah.
But it's getting into the right mindset to win the day every day, right? That's another concept I try to play with around how do I win the day today? Because that's going to have benefits in the future, right? And, you know, Warren Buffett also talked about his most important career move was taking a public speaking course
Dale Carnegie.
at the Carnegie Institute, right? And Dale Carnegie also the Carnegie Institute talks about 85% of your success as a business person, as a human, is driven by soft skills, right? So for me, again, as a shy person, I didn't want to admit that, but now I see it, right? And the more senior I got, my last role was working with executives. I was very comfortable in front of executives because I'd had the training. I'd been in those craft situations where you missed the month by millions of dollars and you've got to take the heat, or your productivity cost savings target's not quite there. And you got to sit there and look at the CEO and say, what's my plan? And so those hard experiences build confidence, right? So back to what you're saying around throwing yourself in the deep end. I love that. I love that phrase. With the right support. You don't go too deep in that deep end, but you want to go somewhere in that zone where you're still thriving, but you're not super uncomfortable.
Patrick, I don't know if you follow Patrick Bet-David. He's got a great YouTube. He's actually got a bunch of channels now, but it started out with valuetainment. He built a huge insurance business, sold it for hundreds of millions, and now he puts out tons and tons of content, mostly business stuff, but a lot of mindset stuff. And one of the things he talks about is sequencing, right? And that you can do the same things, and if you get them in the wrong sequence, you're not going to get the same impact. And so I think about that. I wish I would have gotten a lot of this sort of training and mindset shift years earlier, because I use an example all the time, very similar to what you were describing. When I worked at Royal Caribbean in the planning department, and I was a wet behind the ears financial analyst, and we had a top-down budget, and there was a time I had to sit down with the senior vice president of sales and marketing and say, we have to cut your budget by 5%, even though, by the way, we have a new ship coming online. So you have to sell more to fill up another ship, but we're cutting your budget. And without any of these skills that I've learned over the years, I have to look at this senior vice president and work through this. It was very intimidating. And I'm sure lots of people in FP&A, especially earlier in their career, have to deal with things like that. I just wish, I almost feel like I wish I could get to them sooner. Like people like you and me that have that passion to go, hey, they're skills, man. They're learnable skills. It's
Yes.
not like your eye color, like I'm born shy and that's just where I have to stay. And you can even be, I consider myself an introvert, but situationally extroverted. And I firmly believe I've done several talks with the title like introversion as a superpower. I firmly believe that if you understand it, that you really can use introversion as a superpower because most people don't understand it that well. I have a framework that I use when I talk about communication. It's an acronym called CLEAR, and the C is for context. So I'm always one of the reasons I asked that first question about what you were like as a kid and that through line is to give the audience some context about a little bit more about like kind of who you are as a person, not just the trader or the finance guy. But when you're talking to all these diverse audiences and training people, finance teams can be, especially in today's environment, extremely diverse. So can you share any kind of tips that you might have for folks when they're working in diverse teams on how they can understand the various contexts people are bringing to the table to be able to communicate effectively with that sort of diverse group of people?
Yeah. So I think what I always recommend, and this is whether you start a new job, whether you're in a new department, always encourage people to book time with all their stakeholders. So imagine a meeting where you have six stakeholders, marketing, sales, supply chain, whoever you want to meet with them individually, ask them good questions, do some homework before that, and truly listen to what they're going to say. Truly be curious, be interested. And when you do that, a wonderful thing happens, right? They start saying, okay, John is really interested in my business. They're starting to build that bridge. You're starting to build that bridge into their world. And so first thing is you now understand where they're at. You can also be very perceptive to say, how financially astute are they? So picture yourself then doing a presentation to that same group. I always have a rule to say, talk to the person with the least financial knowledge. Make sure that person can understand it. And then the whole room's going to understand it. So it
Yeah.
takes a lot of skill to be able to look around that table and say, okay, how do I adjust my conversation based on that? I also use a framework in a lot of my training sessions called ACE. I love your clear. I'd love to get that a little later. But so my ACE is very simple. So number one, understand your audience, right? So if it's one-on-one with you, and let's say you're a salesperson, I'm going to put myself into that context and say, what does John care about? What's in it for him, right? WIFM, another brilliant acronym, right? So I start with the audience, then I move to content. I'm then going to create or utilize content that's applicable to John, right? So if you're, again, you're a detailed CFO who loves detailed charts, okay, maybe I'll use that. If you're a high level salesperson who loves visuals, I may use a visual for that, right? I may use a one pager, I may use a detailed. And then the last piece I always talk about is what you talked about earlier, execution, meaning your voice, your body language, your energy. And again, those little things, especially that execution piece gets missed a lot of time because we'll put so
Yeah.
much energy into the deck or the presentation that we won't stop and say, look, this slide might be a little bit of a bomb going into that meeting. Let me think about how to maybe talk to the person who may be on the hot seat ahead of time. Let me talk about how to present that in a way that's still objective and I'm not pointing fingers. And so it's one of those skills that you can keep refining. And I'm still refining it. I'm sure you're still refining it. For sure. Just getting better than you were yesterday. It's about saying, how can I use that? So what's one of my acronyms? And people love that, right? Just a simple clear or ACE where, hey, they can refer to it and keep coming back to it, right? Learning
Yeah.
a journey. It's not a one-stop shop and it's about practicing.
Yeah, most of the people that I follow and really appreciate the stuff that they put out have a very heavy emphasis on the implementation piece. On
Yes.
like that analogy, like going to the gym, right? You can't just go to the gym and work out like a maniac once and be
Yeah.
good to go for the rest of your life, right? That's a good start, but it's one of those things, it's like a muscle you have to exercise. You said something that actually just coincidentally leads into another question I wanted to ask you about listening, which is you talked about being interested when you're listening. And that's something that was very difficult for me to learn because I was always a chatty kid and I was always trying to be interesting. I thought that was the way to connect with people, that if they found me interesting, that they would like me. And I didn't talk about rapport as a kid, but the idea there, we'd be in rapport. but you talked about being interested. So when you're listening, what are some of the things that you find particularly effective in listening more effectively?
So I think it's interestingly enough, you run your own podcast, I do my own. One of the benefits I got out of that is you've got to become a very good listener, right? You've got to really, so it takes a lot of concentration. It takes a lot of putting all the distractions aside. And again, it takes that mindset to say, look, I'm literally going to put myself all in there, really focus on the other person. And at the same time, I'm going to take my time because one of the things people do, they play the tennis game, right? You're already thinking about my response while you're talking. One of the tips I always say is just slow down. It's okay if there's a little bit of a pause, right? And one of the things that's always a good way to do is, hey, recap. The person said, hey, if I heard you correctly, and that's a little bit more in a business context. You don't do that too much socially, but I think it's such an important skill. And the other thing I would say is a lot of people, a lot of times are trying to prove themselves once you let go of that to say, let me just relax, be in the moment, it becomes a beautiful thing where you can just enjoy each other's conversation. Right. And at the same time, I also think it's important to say, let's find people who you are genuinely interested in. You can't fake interest to a certain extent, right? So it's also being real, right? To say, let's steer the conversation in a way that we're both going to get a lot out of it. Rather than, I spent 20 years in business. There's so many meetings and conversations that frankly, maybe only the presenter cared about. And there wasn't enough psychological safety in that room to say, hey, let's change this up. Let's be much more brief about this, or let's go a little deeper, or I don't understand. That's where, back to your point, conversation is such an important piece to continue to develop, right? So I think it's one of the most underutilized skills and probably one of the low hanging fruits that most people can get to truly just be able to ask a good question, especially for introverts. I love listening as an introvert, right? I love learning. And that's why a lot of introverts become phenomenal presenters because they've got so much of that listening. They've got so much information up in their brain and they can then translate all that rich information. Yeah. Left there. I think it's a wonderful skill set that again is not used by many people because of our rushed technology filled world.
Yeah. There's something too that I always suggest people try. It's something that I use to help me listening better. And then it seems contradictory in my training, which is I always try to have something to write with and something to write on. Doesn't matter what it is.
Yes.
I always encourage people that I'd rather you have something physical to write it on, because if you're doing it on your phone, what's the first thing people think? They think you're checking your email or something. But when you're writing, when somebody's talking and you're looking at them and it's obvious you're taking notes, for me, that's a way to keep from interrupting. I'm a curious George. I want to ask a question, but instead of interrupting like I normally would, take that note. But here's where I feel like I contradict myself sometimes. When I'm training people, I always tell them, don't hold your questions till the end. Ask them when they come up, because in context, it's much easier for everyone to understand the question and the answer when that's something that we were deep on that conversation versus waiting till 20 minutes later. Now we don't have the slide up. It's not fresh in everyone's mind. But that's been a big one for me. It seems so simple, and it is, but to simply just write that thing down and then go, okay, get it out of your mind now. You've got it on paper. You can come back to it. Stay fully engaged with what the person's talking about.
Yeah, and I like what you said there. And I think there's so many nuances to communication, right? That's where for me it might seem contradictory, but I don't, because you put it in the right context to say, look, you were there to serve a team and you want to address their questions in the moment. Like that's beautiful. And so I think it's beautiful. And again, it's all about those little nuances. And it's such a rich area to think about.
See, this is one reason I love this podcast. I've had this happen before where I'll present something that to me seems contradictory, and then somebody else's perspective you just gave makes me go, oh, it's not contradictory. It is just a nuance. It's fine. Don't stress about it. It makes sense. It's all about context, right? Thanks for that.
And even just little things like if you're taking notes, or if somebody's taking notes in a meeting, it's always helpful. Hey, by the way, I'm taking notes on my laptop. So just in case you're wondering, because the other person may be assuming, hey, this guy's multitasking or this girl's multitasking, or hey, they're writing down their own personal appointments on. When you talked about Patrick David, I wrote that down. but I didn't say that to you. But again, you could
Right.
have been wondering, hey, is this guy planning his next meeting? So those little things make a big difference, right? Those seemingly
Yeah.
little things that you talked about make a
That's a great point.
difference. And great communicators have the ability to, hey, I just want to set the ground rules. You can ask questions as you want. I also went to a course lately where they said, look, nobody in the audience is allowed to coach the other person, right? It was very clear on he was the master coach and we were all students. So he set the context right. And then when somebody tried to do it, he shut them down in a very professional way. And it was cool. We all understood that
Right.
person crossed the boundary, right? So again, it's
Yeah.
all that little communication can make a massive difference.
That nuance you just said, it's years ago since I made the video, but it was about exactly that. And it, for some reason, ringing in my head is a scene from Braveheart where he's telling his soldiers, do it and let them see you do it. I think it was some kind of distraction they were creating intentionally to move their attention away from where they wanted it. And I talked about when you take notes, do it and make it obvious. Even like you said, sometimes depending on the context, maybe just announce that, hey, if you ever see my head go down and I'm doing this, I'm taking notes on what you're saying. I'm not somewhere else. This is actually helping me. And then as you're going through the course of the conversation, if you're looking back at your notes and saying, so when you said X, Y, and Z, did you mean X, Y, and Z, or am I misunderstanding? So when you're actually demonstrating it, now you're reinforcing. And again, the power, every time I've asked people, if someone's taking notes when you're talking, what does that make you think and feel about them? And they always say the same handful of things. They're interested. This is important to them. It makes me feel important. All these things where I'm like, these are all positive things, right? So one of the other pillars that I talk about, this is, by the way, for me, launched me down the rabbit hole of self-improvement awareness. I had an experience where I realized my self-awareness was garbage. I was not paying attention to people when they were communicating with. I was ignoring people. And it really ticked me off because I consider myself a people person. I love being with people and talking with people. And it sent me down that path to go, okay, I got to fix this. But it was an awareness thing. So what are some of the things you do to stay aware? And you can answer this however you want, whether it's big picture stuff or in the moment stuff, but to stay aware of the changes that are going on in finance and training and communication, all these different environments that you work in, so that you can keep yourself in that upper echelon of trainers in this space that we operate in.
Yeah, I think it becomes having that like learner's mindset, right? It's almost, look, I've got my base framework or something, but I'm open to adapting that to something better or chat GPT. So I credit Paul Barnhurst, my partner, for a lot of my learning. So I was tapped out to a certain extent with Excel. I'm like, look, I do my VLOOKUPs, I do blah, blah, blah. And I don't care about anything else. And he just kept peppering into me, dude, you're missing out. And so now X lookups, because we do a lot of training, I see, wow, I would move to that. So it's just having that openness to continue to learn, which again has been a bit of a new approach now. So even for me on the technical side, which I started putting myself in a little bucket saying, hey, I'm the soft skills person. I'm now open to saying, yeah, I can use chat GPT. I can learn Excel. I can figure out technology pieces. And so I think that's, to me, the mindset that's so important to say, I'm going to be open to changing things up. And again, when I worked in a lot of these big companies that you talked about, our budget cycles would be 6 months. Think about a 6-month cycle in today's world. It's complete and ridiculous.
Yeah.
And the budget would essentially be garbage because it was a very linear process. If I was to ever go back, I would be like very controversial in this end. Like, let's go to a sprint budget. Let's figure out a way to make this much faster because that's the way the business moves. So I think that's where leaders sometimes get trapped in, wait, we've always done it a certain way and it's important for blah, 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 blah. Whereas if you're really open to how can we do it better, the team then adopts that mentality, right? Like the rest of the team moves at the speed of the leader.
Yeah.
Right? You're open for that learning. If you've got that growth mindset, if you say, look, let's really not take it personally and say, how can we do it better? Even if you created the process is really important. So again, I think it all comes back to mindset as we talked about, to just be open and curious and figure out ways to learn, carve out time to learn every single day. Because and one of my ways that I listen to podcasts whenever I do I'm doing a training session on delegation next week. I was just listening
Mm.
to a YouTube video while I was walking the dog, right? And saying,
Yep.
look, there's a couple of nuggets I could potentially bring it. And those little micro moments compound into like phenomenal knowledge, right? You and I, we need a lot of material. We need a lot of content
Yeah.
with people. So trainers who are not up to speed on latest developments are missing out and they're not serving their clients. So there's so many reasons that it's important for you and I to learn every day.
Yeah. Something you said about if you were to ever go back, it might be controversial if I remember the word you used correctly. It reminds a buddy of mine that he started a new CFO job. This is years ago. And in one of the first meetings with his team, they were going through all the different reports they sent out, when they sent them out, the distribution list and all of that. And he's looking at this and he's going, "God, we send out a ton of reports." And he starts asking them, what do they use this for? And he's asking this about all these reports. And most of the people couldn't answer the question. He said, okay, that's fine. Here's what we're going to do. I want you to send out an email asking everybody what they use each report for. And then I think we can eliminate, and he created a list. Stop sending out those reports and let's see what happens. Let's see who asked for those reports. And then when they ask for those reports, ask them, do you mind if I ask, what are you guys using this for? And his thinking was, we've probably got some overlaps and duplication. Maybe we can combine reports, make some dashboards, whatever the case. But what he found fascinating is they eliminated a bunch of reports. And for most of them, nobody ever spoke up and said, hey, I didn't get that report.
Yes.
And he said, we're just going to stop producing those. If they come back and they say, I need XYZ, we'll handle that case by case. But his experience just in looking at the number of reports and who were getting them, he just immediately thought, yeah, we got to change this up. Doing this because that's how we've always done it. Worst reason ever to do almost anything. Let's shift gears here because you mentioned your collaboration with Paul Barnhurst, the FP&A guy. For those in the finance space, I'm sure they know who he is. I'm curious, tell me a little bit about how did you and Paul meet? How did you go from meeting to now collaborating on a lot of stuff that you do? And I know you guys have a big launch starting tomorrow of a brand new thing that I think is a pretty big deal. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. And just to clarify, so he has a collaboration with a couple other gentlemen called Plan Buddy. So I'm not part of that, but I'm participating as a speaker.
Yep.
And so I'm excited for Paul and his team on that one. So Paul and myself, actually, we met at an FP&A Trends event where we were both speaking. So there's a wonderful organization, FP&A Trends. You may be familiar with them.
Yes, Larissa.
Melnichuk. So we were speaking and we're both practitioners. And interestingly enough, there's something about Paul's approach that I really like. And I was just on the cusp of starting my own business. So I asked him, hey, do you want to connect? And we were, again, both practitioners. We hadn't started our business. And we just had a really good exchange, right? Just sharing, hey, what are you passionate about? Things like that. And we agreed to keep in touch. A lot of those times you never really end up talking to the person again.
Yeah.
Once I started my business, I did a session for one of my clients and then they asked me, hey, what else do you do? And at the time I had nothing else in my repertoire. but they said, look, by any chance you do Excel training, because they really liked my approach. And look, I can't train Excel, but I remembered Paul and I just called him up again. Like one of the secrets in life is just to ask. And I asked him, I was like, hey, Paul, are you interested in building a course for my clients here? And he's yes. And put it together. And he just absolutely killed it. It was amazing. And then I was like, okay, I've done soft skills courses for many other clients. I'm going to go to every single one of them and ask them if they want Excel training. And some of them said yes. And what Paul and myself found is we have great chemistry, right? And that's where I've tried to work with other people who maybe the chemistry wasn't there and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's one of those ones where we stumbled upon a relationship where we have complementary skills and we have good chemistry. And one of the things I always talk about is in finance, sometimes we don't have enough fun. One of the things Paul and myself have is we have a ton of fun. We do training sessions together. He telling his lame Excel jokes. We're poking fun at each other. And the other thing that I'm sure you've noticed is when you're in business by yourself, it's a little bit lonely at times. So for me, it's been pretty cool where we'll bounce stuff off each other and we'll message each other. And this morning he messaged me and stuff like that. So a bit of cool collaboration. And the other thing is we both help each other raise our game. So when I'm not at my best, he'll be like, hey, I think you can do better. For example, my work on slides was shoddy at first. Like it was terrible. And he's helped me upskill, say, hey, same font, same look, same feel. We got to take our game up. At the same time, when Paul started 3 years ago, his soft skills were not where they are now. Like the guy's now like running two amazing podcasts and just a phenomenal speaker. But if you looked at him 3 years ago, he was not the same person, which is amazing to see his growth. So again, just how we connected, I think there's some chemistry, and it's all in the spirit of serving clients and saying, how can we help you get better?
Yeah. So the two things that I got from that were the chemistry and the complementary skills. I think that's where over the years I've struggled with finding collaboration partners.
Yes.
Is it seems like every time I connect with someone and there's that chemistry, it's because we are interested in the same stuff and we pretty much do the same stuff. So collaboration, sometimes you're just both doing the same things. If you can find a way where you're coming at it from a different angle and that adds value, that's still great. But I think that complementary skills or topics that you're teaching feels like that's a big piece of what is making you guys collaboration work for you guys.
Yeah. And the other word is compromise too, right? It's being able to say, look, I'm going to maybe take Paul's approach on this, or he's going to take my approach on this. And even from a financial standpoint, if I do a session that I sold, I could do it myself and get the full revenue. But if I do it with Paul, there's a compromise financially, but it's so much more comfortable. We bring a better product to the table.
Yeah.
And we both try to take the long road, right? Not, hey, let's not think about this one session. Let's think about the journey. And am I going to be better off? And my client's going to be better off if they have two facilitators versus one, right? I totally agree with you. Chemistry, collaboration, compromise, a lot of C word.
And something else you said is having a mindset to look at the bigger picture, right? You and I met because I asked Christian Waddick to co-present with me. I had already booked the session as the presenter, and I thought, I looked at what he was doing and I thought, you bring a different skill set, a different perspective. And because of that, I met you and several other people at that dinner that we met at, which never would have happened if I just thought, I got this, I'm going to do it my way. I've already got the present, just me. And I thought, I don't know what could come of this collaboration, but I like what he brings to the table. Let's just try and see. Because sometimes I think as finance people, we're very sort of goal and metric driven. So sometimes it can be a little hard to say, I don't know what the outcome is going to be. I don't have a metric I'm trying to measure here. I just feel like there's some value that's going to come from this. Let's just try this and see. And that's okay. And sometimes it might not go well. I've had collaborations where it was like, okay, one and done. Nothing really there. And other times, I mean, we could go on for hours, both of us probably, with stories about where you weren't sure where this thing was going and something great came of it. And you just never know.
Yeah. And look, I'll just go back to that story with Paul. Well, neither of us were getting paid for that little presentation that we did, but it turned into like a multi-year collaboration where we both just volunteered our time to speak at a FP&A Trends event. And then at the AFP event, such cool that I spent a ton of time with Andrew Childress, who's a phenomenal guy you mentioned. And I met yourself, Kristen and myself. Actually, I told him about a course I was taking and he joined me for 2 days in that. And it's like an abundance philosophy, right? Which even when you asked me about your framework, maybe 5-10 years ago, I'd be like, I'm not going to share my ACE framework. Let me put it out there. Like if you can use it, perfect. If somebody else wants to use it, it's a big world, right? Like there's 8 billion people or something like that. And it's really and I loved what you said about letting go of the outcome. It really is about the activity. A lot of sports coaches, John Witten, coaches like that. It's about what is activity you put in and the results will take care of itself. And again, you talked about trusting your gut. You got to build that gut to say, look, there's something here. I'm going to go after this, even though it might not be a clear-cut metric. That's true value. That's business partnership. To say, I'm not just going to stay on that paved road. I'm sometimes going to venture on because I've built enough, listened enough, I've learned enough. I've gone out to my customers. I've done the research to know that there's something there, even if I can't tangibly put my finger on it.
What the last thing you just said is at the heart of my shift in how I looked at gut feelings. And it was learning enough. Some of the books that you see back here are body language experts.
Yes.
Last year and a half or so ago, I stumbled across this YouTube channel called the Behavior Panel. And it's these 4 behavior experts, and their MOs, they just show like a little video clip, typically of an interview. Sometimes it's someone who's been arrested or a press conference or something. And they'll show the little video clip, and then they'll break down the person's body language, the language that they're using, and they analyze it. And in studying a lot of what they talked about, what I realized is that gut feeling, we don't necessarily always have the vocabulary to articulate what is going on there. But that gut feeling is literally our body producing chemicals that make us feel a certain way. And we're getting input from the outside world. And then our body has a physiological reaction. It releases, maybe it's endorphins or dopamine or whatever it is that makes us feel a certain way. There is a reason for it. The disconnect sometimes is we just don't have the vocabulary to connect the dots. And so I think it's important when you have a lot of experience to follow your gut more. When you're earlier in your career, you don't have as much life experience. It's not that you can't follow your gut. You just have to be a little bit more discerning about when you do and you don't. But to your point, when you have that experience and you feel like this just feels right, or vice versa, this doesn't feel right, maybe I need to step back.
Yes.
I think especially as you get more senior into your career, it makes sense to let go, follow your gut. And I've heard it referred to as the second brain. Our gut and our brain are connected.
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on behind the scenes that we're just not cognitively aware of, that blind spot of the things we don't know. Let's talk about engagement for a minute, because you talked about one of the things that you like with Paul is you guys have fun together. And that's something that I'm always trying to figure out ways of making my trading more engaging, more fun. I have all kinds of little ideas that I've implemented and some that I still haven't. What are some of the things that you've done to boost engagement when you're doing trading or even speaking?
Yeah. So the funniest one was like, I was trying to play a video at one of our virtual sessions and I was having some technical issues. I couldn't do it. And I said, "Hey, Paul, can you just tell a joke?" Well, I was like sweating. I was like, I got to get figured. And I was like, I need the spotlight off me. And this guy pulls out a book of Excel jokes and he starts telling them. And what was interesting, like a really accidental innovation, is the crowd just went nuts. Like they're like, "Oh, tell us another." And so now how do we intersperse those in the right times, right? If we're having a very serious discussion, we're not going to put it in there. But things like that make a big difference, right? It's those little things. I mean, even just the personal introductions at the start of the session. Get people to introduce themselves, get them to talk. Again, people don't want to just listen to two trainers for hours upon hours. So how do we involve people as much as possible? And how do we inject as much fun as possible, especially in a virtual environment? Especially if somebody's been voluntold into the course, right? If their manager signed them
Very
up.
common with what we do.
Yeah. And they're not necessarily going in with, "Hey, I'd love to do this course." They're like, "Oh, I've been signed up for the course." And then what if you can pleasantly surprise them? What if they're like, "Oh man, that was a great experience and a fun experience. I learned a lot and I had fun." And that's the ultimate goal. And again, I think I said it earlier, but finance doesn't have enough fun. Finance and accounting, we're a boring function. I want to change that, right? I want to say, no, we know our numbers and we're going to be the conscience of the organization, but that doesn't mean we can't have fun, right?
Yep.
That's the mindset shift and the belief that finance people can have to say, yes, I'm going to add value, but I'm going to take Friday afternoons off if the rest of the organization is taking it off.
Yep.
Which many times doesn't happen. Or your report example is beautiful because I've seen that many times. All these reports that are being sent out and people staying late and stuff like that. What if nobody's reading them? That had just I have a lot of passion to say, look, how do we get finance to really take that ownership that you talked about?
Yeah. Are there any, I've stumbled across different tools that I've experimented with, especially like for engagement in a virtual environment. Are there any that you've tried that you still use because they're really good with engagement?
I'd say that's one area we need to get better at. I think some other trainer, it might be Christian, who uses Kahoot. It's a little trivia
like Kahoot.
in the midst of it. I love that. I think that's a cool idea. And so I think there's lots of creative ways to say, how do we engage? How do we engage people? At the same time, it's always a balance, right? You don't want it to be a sideshow where it's more valuable than or more fun than the actual content. So it is important to say, how much of it do you do? and when do you put it in there, right? And that's where it's a learning journey, right? Like when me and Paul first did our courses, it was nonstop instruction, too much content. We were flying through the content, like you say, in bold, because we had too much. And now, okay, less is more,
Guilty.
right? You learn that
Yeah.
3 years later, you have enough confidence to say, instead of 90 slides, I'm going to have 45. I'm making it up. But that's again what you talked about, just starting, just start, just try it,
Yep.
learn, adjust, get better every day.
Yeah. You just gave me a flashback to the very first AFP conference I spoke at in 2013, 1 hour. And I want to say it was like 76 slides or something ridiculous. And like all the wrong slides that look like an eye chart and too much stuff on the slide and pointing at the slide and going, I know you can't read that, but if you're starting with that, step back. You're already doing something wrong there, right? I did all of that stuff. And now I've taken different courses and all these different things. And exactly to your point, it's an iterative process. It's just every day, every week, every month, I'm like, hey, that guy's doing something better than I'm doing. Let me figure that out. What's going on there? I heard somebody do this guy, Mark Bowden, he's a behavior expert, great TED talk that he gave. And he has this intro I think it's 1 or 2 sentences. It's so tight, so concise, but it says exactly what he does so well. And I feel like over time, I've been looking at that and dissecting and okay, why that word? Why is it structured this way?
Yes.
And I'm always trying to find who's top of the food chain and what can I learn from them? Because sometimes they're so far ahead. If you look at Tony Robbins, right? I took Tony Robbins' coaching program, but just because I took a coaching program and have a certification from Tony Robbins, that doesn't mean I could get you the results Tony Robbins gets. He's been doing it for 40 something years, right?
Yeah.
But you can look at that and go, all right, what's 1 or 2 things I can work on? Let me just pick 1 or 2 things, work on those, get better, and then I'll go back and maybe I'll take one other thing and I'll keep working. One of the things I want to ask you about that for me has grown in importance, and I'm finding ChatGPT has helped me a lot with this, which is I feel like in finance, we have a lot of SOPs for all the technical stuff, right? We have SOPs on how we do reports, on how we do analysis, on what metrics we look at, all kinds of things related to the budget. But in my experience, most organizations have little to no SOPs around their communication. How do we communicate? What channels do we use when? And all these different types of things. I'm curious, what has been your experience in just seeing how different organizations approach any kind of standardization of how, how they're communicating?
Yeah, I think if you were to ask me in my career, all the managers who I've worked for, all the companies I've worked for, there's been a massive diversity in approaches on communication. And I think what I've really learned in my career is that the more you communicate, the better. Captain Obvious statement for sure, but easier said than done, right? And I'll give you an example. When things get really crazy, really busy, a lot of managers, a lot of leaders will cancel their one-on-ones, cancel their team meetings. I would argue that's the exact opposite thing to do. What you should do, in my opinion, is, okay, maybe you tighten the time frame. You say, instead of an hour, we're going to do 15 minutes, but we're going to have a quick huddle. We're going to make sure we're on the same page. As a leader, maybe there's some context you need to communicate. That's good management. Or that one-on-one. If you cancel the one-on-one, you're communicating, oh, that's not as important. It's less important than my priorities. Maybe a little disengagement on the team. Maybe less accountability for your team members. So for me, it is really being brilliant on those basics, one-on-ones, team meetings, going in with a clear agenda, which takes work, right? To saying, hey, have I really thought through our priorities? And am I able to eliminate some and move some up higher? And then things like town halls, right? And that's where, for me, I think it's a huge opportunity for finance leaders to say, I'm going to have a monthly town hall with my team, with my broader team. And think about the power of that to say, hey, maybe there's an inspirational segment and maybe there's a key priority segment and a recognition segment. And that's where engagement levels, retention, all these things are way up on the charts where people think, hey, I can't waste the time. Actually, it's a massive investment in time. So I think it's a really good question to say, do leaders really think about their SOPs, their standard meetings that are not negotiable? You can't cancel that. Maybe I'll move it in an extreme case, but that's a commitment, right? And I've seen direct results from my last company. I booked a monthly FP&A team meeting with all our divisions. And we started sharing knowledge and going through the financials. And again, people started becoming tighter as a team. They started gaining knowledge. And so for me, it's back to what you said earlier, communication is really everything.
Yeah.
And that's what it's all about. So I think that's something that's a massive opportunity across the finance field.
Yeah. I wish more people focused on that. There's a couple of teams that I've done training for where it was so obvious that their rapport and communication was so much better than some of the other teams I'd worked with, where somebody would just interrupt someone with an idea and it felt totally comfortable, right? Like they had done this many times before and they were so in sync with this rapport that they had that everyone was much more open. It felt much more like a brainstorming session than a meeting where people would just say, hey, what about this? And sometimes it would be like, yeah, probably not a great idea. They'd move on. But at least they felt comfortable to bubble up just any idea and just share it and get some quick, honest feedback. And it was the rapport that you can't replace that. And I just wish I'm working on this actively right now to develop some ways for people to create their own specific set of SOPs that's really going to help them take things to the next level. I'm curious, one of the tools that I've been using a lot is these AI meeting assistants, right? Read AI is one that I've used quite a bit. Where have you used any of these where they give you a lot of feedback and stats? For example, they will tell you what percentage of the time each person is talking. They give you an engagement score. They count inclusive and non-inclusive language, all these different things where you can look at objective measures of different things about your communication within these meetings. And I keep going back and forth because I think the data is fascinating and can be helpful. But like a lot of the assessments that we use, sometimes people can go down the wrong rabbit hole where they go, oh, this person is a type X on this assessment. So that means all these things about them. And then they pigeonhole them.
Yeah, no, frankly, I'm not using any of those tools, but it's a good prompt for me to think about that because it's a spirit of minute. I think your point is good, right? If you see one person in a meeting one time, that's not enough data. Maybe they're having a bad day. Maybe there's something else going on. And so it's important to be very thoughtful as a leader and not, as you said, pigeonhole. And so if somebody said, hey, Ron's just a storytelling presentation guy, there's so much more to me or to you than that. And that's one of my expertise, but it's much deeper.
Yeah. My concern with the tool is that people just start looking at data points and separate it from the person.
Yes.
And the whole purpose of this thing was to get a better understanding of how we all communicate so that we can all start to adapt ourselves to communicate more effectively. And if we then just start saying, let me look at this report about Ron. And it says, oh, he uses a lot of filler words and he uses weak language and he talks a lot. You're just looking at data without looking at Ron. And you're going, it's going exactly where we didn't want to go with it. So I'm trying to iterate and try to figure out there's a place for it somewhere. I'm not sure where it is though. We're getting to the top of the hour. So I want to wrap up with what you mentioned, that one of the things that you offer is a free coaching session. Can you tell our audience what is that free coaching session and how can they take advantage of that?
Yeah, no, I was just saying, look, I'm willing to offer one coaching session to one of your listeners. You can manage that however you want. And I love just coaching to where the need is. So I always ask, hey, what you want to talk about? And I love coaching sessions where you can get into a breakthrough to say, hey, what's a different perspective? And again, circling back to where we started, it was really around the coaches, managers, mentors who actually believed in me more than I believed in myself that helped me get to where I am. I'm a huge believer in continuous improvement and helping others. Yeah, John, any of your listeners are welcome. And I'm happy to dedicate, an hour to a coaching session to one of your listeners.
All right. So I'm a big fan, as it sounds like you are, of taking action. So whoever does that first, the first one to raise their hand and say, hey, I want to take advantage of this awesome offer. Tell us real quick, what's the easiest way for folks to get in touch with you? We'll have all your information in the show notes, but if they just want to get in touch with you right away, what's the quickest way?
Yeah, I would say LinkedIn. LinkedIn's the best way to approach me. I'm quite frequently on there and always happy to engage, right? Whether it's a student at a local university or somebody who's a CEO, I'm I think it's all about one-to-one contact and having a spirit of learning from everybody. Yeah, I love that. And absolute pleasure being on your podcast, John. Congratulations.
Thanks for being on it. By the way, if you have not checked his stuff out on LinkedIn, you put stuff out. I don't know if it's every single day, but it's pretty close to every day. I follow your stuff today. I know you put out a checklist, like a year end. Was it year end or month end?
Yeah. So no,
So
I was thinking through this, right? And I'm approaching a lot of my clients, and frankly, not many people are responding because they're in the year end chaos, right? And so
yeah.
another LinkedIn gentleman, Abdul colleague, he's just phenomenal. I put out his checklist that
Okay.
he spent a lot of time developing. So again, sometimes it's leveraging somebody else's content and saying, hey, Paul did this amazing guide on
Yeah.
Excel, or Abdul actually has a checklist. So why would I go try and spend time developing something I don't have a ton of expertise when Abdul has this tremendous checklist? And I asked him, I said, hey, do you mind if I post it? And he said, yes. And so again, I'm hoping that would help those people in the line of fire right now as they go through year end.
Yeah. And that's a great demonstration of what you talked about, that abundance mindset. That, hey, there's plenty out there for everybody. We're just trying to pass along things that we think can help, that might be beneficial to folks. Try it. Maybe it helps you, maybe it doesn't, but just passing it along. And I know you do create a lot of your own personal content as well. So definitely give Rod a follow his stuff, and we'll wrap up. So I want to respect everybody's time, and we will see you next time. Remember, everybody, communication is about more than words.